The southern plains under a high sky in the late 19th century. Homeland of the Numunu, the Comanche. How did Quanah Parker move from war chief to diplomatic bridge? Wind over the Llano Estacado as buffalo fade after 1870. Mobility is power. Horses are wealth. Fort Concho, Fort Richardson, and Fort Sill fixed new control points by the early 1870s. Telegraphs click. Orders still ride. Actors come into view. Numunu Quahadi with Kaigwu beside them. United States troops and agents press to confine movement. Medicine Lodge. 1867 sets reservation terms. Adobe Walls, June 1874, jolts the frontier. The Red River War, 1874 to 1875 follows. Buffalo collapse removes choice. At Fort Sill, issue lines and ledgers begin to replace the hunt. From the Quahadi rises Quanah Parker. He turns from raids to leases and from camp council to Washington travel. A road of prayer steadies hard years. What carries a leader from Canyon Trail to agency ledger? Why did that choice shape the Numunu future? Late 19th century pressures gather on the southern plains. The Numunu economy rests on buffalo horses and movement. Settlement and rails press from the east and south. By the early 1860s, the frontier is thinly held. The war between United States and Confederacy pulls regular troops away. Raids and reprisals multiply across river lines. After 1865, federal power returns with new aims. Concentrate mobile nations near agencies. Protect trails and rails. Replace hunting with rations and schools. Medicine Lodge. 1867 offers annuities and a reservation below the Washita. Some bands sign. The Quahadi do not attend and do not accept fixed lines. Railroads extend freight and hunting markets. Cattle trails cross open range. Traders carry heavy rifles into buffalo country. The herds begin to fall. Buffalo hunters form camps on the Canadian Forks. Wagons haul hides east. Bones and empty range mark each season after 1870. Agents post rules on movement and issue days. Leave the reservation and risk loss of rations. Come in to receive flour, coffee, sugar, and beef. War Department and Interior divide authority. Orders move by telegraph to posts. On the Llano, Estacado messages still ride by courier. United States objectives are clear. End raiding. Secure rail and cattle corridors. Bring families to agencies where policy can be enforced. United States constraints are also clear. Distance. Water scarcity. Forage for horses. Winter cold on open marches. Numunu objectives remain constant. Follow the last herds. Keep autonomy of council and camp. Protect families from hunger and capture. Numunu constraints tighten each month. Ammunition grows short. Horse feed is scarce in dry seasons. Buffalo trails break under pressure. Treaty promises strain in practice. Delayed deliveries thin the ration lines. Some agents are strict or corrupt. Trust erodes. Schools become a tool of policy. Children are pressed to learn English and to cut hair. Ceremony faces bans under agency rules. Arrests of Kaigwu leaders in 1871 signal a harder line. The message reaches Quahadi camps. Leadership networks adapt and disperse. By spring 1874, tension peaks at Adobe Walls. The clash with hunters becomes a trigger. The United States prepares a sustained campaign into the staked plains. Winter calculations sharpen. Camps weigh hunger against risk. The road toward Fort Sill comes into view, but not yet as a choice many are ready to make. Early winter 1868 on the Washita. A dawn attack on a Cheyenne village sends shock through plains camps. News rides by courier. Winter no longer guarantees safety. Spring 1869 on the Canadian River, scouts report small Numunu and Kaigwu raiding parties, avoiding forts and striking for horses. Telegraph orders chase rumors across long miles. Summer 1869 near Fort Sill, agency interpreters try to summon off reservation bands. Distance and distrust slow replies. Camps shift deeper onto the Llano Estacado. Autumn 1869. Hide outfits push west from railheads. Freight teams cut new ruts across buffalo ground. Trade goods and heavy rifles changed the balance at long range. Winter, 1870. Drought and cold thin horse feed on open flats. Families split to find grass and water. Couriers miss camps that move at night. Spring, 1870. At Fort Richardson, patrols sweep the Brazos Forks. Reports note few contacts, but many sign of large camps beyond the canyons. Summer, 1870. Bones pile near hunter camps on the Upper Canadian. The herds shrink along old trails. Hunters write home about profit. Camps count fewer animals each moon. Autumn, 1870. Agency ledgers list missed issues for families away from line. Agents warn that rations will be docked for absence. Trust thins with each entry. Winter, 1871. A cavalry column escorts arrested Kaigwu leaders to Fort Sill. Word spreads along the Red River Forks. Councils meet in low voices under cottonwood groves. Spring, 1871. Near Fort Concho, scouts lose the trail in wind and gypsum dust. Messages arrive late to posts. Field commanders report the country itself is an ally to mobile camps. Summer, 1871. Families near Fort Sill move closer to issue days for flour and coffee. Off-reservation bands avoid roads and wells used by patrols. Autumn, 1871. At Fort Sill, an agent records a rising number of orphans and widows. Disease follows crowded issue lines. Camps on the plains hear and weigh the news. Agent clerk, ledger note. Fort Sill Agency Office, October 1871. Rations short this week and distribution restless. 32 families absent from rolls said to be with Quahadi on the Staked Plains. Children fevered and beef late. Winter, 1872. The Llano Estacado wind drives sand over trails. Hunters hole up in dugouts. Scouts note few tracks and many old fire rings. Spring, 1872. Rails reach farther into the plains from Kansas. Telegraph stations multiply. Army orders move faster on wire than wagons can follow. Summer, 1872. A mail carrier reports a meeting with a small Numunu party near Sweetwater Creek. They ask about powder and the price of cattle. He rides on without delay. Autumn, 1872. At agency councils, elders ask for reliable beef and protection from hunter trespass. The agent cites his limited authority and the distance to Washington. Winter, 1873. Long cold and a poor chase mark the season. Families nearer Fort Sill depend on issue more than before. Camps on the plains move again and again for grass. Spring, 1873. Patrols from Fort Dodge probe south along the Canadian Forks. They find burned camps and ash pits where dried meat once hung. No battle, only absence. Summer, 1873. Hunters concentrate around new posts on the Canadian. Ammunition wagons arrive regular. Camp talk says the herds cannot bear another winter like this. Autumn, 1873. A messenger from a Kaigwu headman rides to a Quahadi camp with news of arrests and rules. The council sends him back with silence as reply. Winter, 1874. Snow patches linger in canyon shade. Forage is thin. Parties scout Adobe Walls where hunter stores and rifles are thick behind stout timbers. Late spring, 1874. Messenger lines tighten between camps across the Canadian and Red River Forks. Interpreters near Fort Sill hear of a plan to strike the hunter posts. June, 1874. At Adobe Walls, the coalition attacks at first light. Heavy rifles answer from within. The walls hold. Riders wheel away into wind and dust, and the news runs far. Columns form after Adobe Walls. The Department of the Missouri and the Department of Texas plan a converging march into the forks of the Canadian and the Red River. Orders move on wire. Scouts ride ahead. The aim is not set piece battle. The aim is to break camps and mobility. From Fort Concho, a column under Mackenzie pushes northwest toward Tule and Palo Duro. Mules strain on gypsum flats. Water dictates pace. From Fort Dodge, a column under Miles moves down the Canadian. Guides rid old ash pits and trampled fords. Smaller forces probe from Fort Sill and Fort Bascom. The idea is pressure from many directions, so no camp can rest. A general order states the rule of engagement. Strike hostile camps. Seize or destroy supplies and mounts. Spare women and children when possible. General order, Headquarters St. Louis, August 1874. Pursue to submission. Avoid needless loss of life. Break capacity to roam. Contact comes first as dust on the horizon. Scouts fan out. The country hides sound in wind. Skirmishes flicker at springs and crossings. Shots trade across distance. Camps refuse pitched battle and slip away at dusk. The columns learn a new arithmetic. To stop a moving nation, take the horses and the dried meat. Fire becomes a weapon against winter. Late September, 1874, in Palo Duro. The trail drops steep into shade. Mackenzie finds a spread of lodges and corrals in side canyons. The attack scatters families. Fires take robes and cached meat. Corrals are emptied in haste. Panic mixes with discipline. Captive herds are driven up the rim. Forage is short, guards are few. Decisions follow hard ground and empty wagons. After action note, field camp near Thule, September 1874. We cannot feed or hold the captured stock. Many must be shot to deny their use. This is the hinge. Casualties in the canyon are limited that day. The loss of mounts and food turns weeks into surrender paths. Fact and folklore part ways here. Some retellings claim every horse died in a single hour. Records show many hundreds destroyed over several days for lack of forage and guards. Miles drives south along the Canadian. He strikes caches and small camps. He captures stock and burns stores. The same method repeats. Cold comes early. Snow stays in shade. Forage thins. Families without mounts face long miles on foot. Runners reach Fort Sill with word of scattered bands. Agents prepare to register arrivals. Ledgers are opened and rations planned. On the plains, the remaining parties test the edges. Small raids seek powder and cattle. Patrols answer and push them away from wells. An order from department staff narrows objectives. Accept surrender at agency lines. Disarm on receipt. Record names by household. Department staff order, St. Louis, October 1874. No paroles in the field. All submissions go through agency control. Kaigwu and allied families move first toward Fort Sill. Some Numunu groups follow river courses west to east. Others hold out in rough breaks. A frozen night near Sweetwater Creek takes horses that were already thin. The cost is counted in the morning by hoof prints that end. Scouts report fewer fresh trails. Old fire rings outnumber new. The country grows quiet except for wind and wagon iron. At Fort Sill, the ration house fills. Issue days lengthen. Interpreters work without rest. Names go into ledgers in careful hand. Quanah keeps a small group apart in canyons while he measures outcomes. He watches the flow toward the post and the food line. A courier brings news of families already at Fort Sill. Children eat. Elders ask for blankets. The report weighs heavy. Mackenzie writes that resistance is now a matter of fragments. He asks permission to stand down large scouts and focus on escorts. Miles concurs in a brief wire. The campaign has broken movement. The winter will finish what the marches began. Fact versus folklore returns at the canyon rim. Stories later say the canyons burned for days without pause. Reports note targeted fires set to supplies and lodges, not the land itself. By early spring 1875, the choice narrows to two roads: starvation on the open flats or rations at the post. Pride holds, but hunger argues. Quanah decides. He gathers families who trust him and rides for Fort Sill. The march is slow without spare mounts. Arrival at the post is formal and plain. Weapons stacked, names entered. Issue waits behind a counter. A final after-action from a cavalry captain closes the field phase. Cavalry captain, report, Fort Sill, May 1875. The enemy faded rather than fell. We broke what made distance possible. The rest came in on their own feet. The campaign ends without a single decisive pitched battle. It ends with canyons emptied, horses lost, and a new kind of control fixed at the agency. Spring 1875. The decision takes shape. Quanah gathers families in the breaks and points the road toward Fort Sill. The march is measured by slow hooves and empty packs. Immediate effects ripple outward. Raiding ceases from these households. Patrols shorten their circles. The agency prepares winter allotments of blankets and seed. Human cost remains. A clerk notes 2 infant burials within days of arrival. Disease travels where crowds and weak bodies meet. Winter count memory fixes the turn. The symbol for this year becomes a horse with bony ribs beside a ration house door. Some protest that surrender was not complete. Fact and folklore must be parted. Many still on the plains held out for a time. Yet the center of gravity moved to the post. Quanah steps into a new role at once. He speaks for order at issue lines and asks the agent for fair measure and regular days. He visits camps that still hesitate near the canyons. He tells them what he saw at the post. He says there is food, but also rules. An officer admits the method behind the outcome. Army officer, testimony, Washington hearing room, 1880. We starved their horses and burned their meat. Hunger carried them farther than our bullets could. Counterfactuals sit close. If buffalo herds had held 2 more seasons, the Quahadi could have stayed off the wire and out of the ledger. If columns had not converged and destroyed horse herds, resistance might have stretched into the next decade. But the numbers did not permit that road. Ammunition stockpiles were gone. Forage was gone. The long chase had emptied the margins of choice. A council at Fort Sill sets the first clear terms. Remain near the agency. Accept issue days. Send children to the school when told. Quanah asks for seed and for a small herd to grow. He presses for a fair beef contract, so meat will not fail when the next cold comes. He walks the new line between community expectation and federal rule. He uses the interpreter and the ledger as tools the way he once used a scout and a trail. The initiative shifts in a single season. The Army stands down long scouts. The agent becomes the daily authority. The postsmith and the ration clerk replace the warpath. Families retie kin networks broken by years of movement. Widows and orphans gather under the protection of larger households. Camp circles reform in fixed ground. News of the change travels west. Some last bands come in before winter closes. Others vanish for a time, then appear at issue day as thin strangers. By first frost, the turning point is complete. The open-range fight is over for the Quahadi with Quanah. A political and administrative struggle begins in its place. Fort Sill becomes the center of daily life. The agent's ledger fixes households and issue days. Beef, flour, coffee, and sugar replace the hunt as the ration economy takes hold. Census counts rise with new arrivals and then dip with disease. Measles and whooping cough take children. Elders weaken after the long winter. Quanah speaks for order at the ration house. He asks for steady deliveries and honest waits. He learns the cadence of the clerk's book. Grazing leases open a narrow road to cash. Texas and Kansas herds need pasture. Quanah argues that lease money can feed families and buy tools. Survey lines tighten the reservation. Riders mark corners on prairie grass. The open circle of camp becomes a fixed grid of districts. Schools expand under agency rule. Boys cut hair and wear uniforms. Girls sew in classrooms where Numunu words are not allowed. Some ceremonies face bans. Councils move them to quiet ground and hold them in shorter form. Memory becomes a shield when law is near. The Star House rises near Fort Sill. Delegations meet under its roof. Visitors note a host who can speak in council and in the language of offices. Newspapers print interviews that frame Quanah as a bridge. He uses the attention to press for supplies and to delay harmful changes. Allotment pressure builds after the middle years. Survey crews speak of individual parcels and opened lands. The community fears a shrinking base. The Jerome Agreement talks arrive in 1892. Terms on paper reduce the land but promise payments and provisions. Debate is sharp in camp circles. Quanah seeks the least damaging path. He secures some clauses that soften the blow. The line of loss still moves across the map. Lease income steadies households through dry seasons. Small herds grow under watch. The agency insists on permits and brands. Language survives around lodge fires and in early dawn. Elders speak Numunu while children practice new words learned at school. Early Native American church meetings gather at night. Quanah supports the Peyote Road as prayer and discipline. Faith becomes a line of endurance. Returns and agent reports stack in Washington files. They count births, deaths, cattle, and school attendance. They do not count songs or winter count dreams. Fact and folklore diverge in memory of these years. Some say all ceremonies stopped. Records and testimonies show persistence under pressure. By the new century, travel links Fort Sill to distant cities. Quanah meets presidents and businessmen. At home, he mends quarrels and keeps families fed. He dies in 1911 after long service. Burial near Fort Sill draws a wide circle of mourners. The Star House stands as a sign of a lived bridge. The Comanche Nation continues in Oklahoma today. Government programs, language classes, and cultural gatherings carry the line forward. The story does not end at the ledger. Historians broadly agree that Quanah Parker bridged a violent frontier and an administrative order preserving lives, while authority shifted to the agency. Consensus holds that his leadership helped convert military defeat into political leverage at Fort Sill, securing rations, leases, and limited protections. A second consensus point is structural force. Buffalo collapse rails and converging campaigns fixed the outer limits of choice more than any single decision. A third view emphasizes cultural continuance. Language ceremony and kin networks adapted under pressure, with Quanah's public role shielding private practice. Contested questions remain about Palo Duro numbers, especially horses destroyed and supplies burned, where field reports and later retellings diverge. Debate also persists over unity behind the 1875 move to Fort Sill, whether strategy or necessity led, and how dissent voiced itself in camp. Scholars differ on the Jerome Agreement legacy, weighing land loss against negotiated terms that softened but did not halt dispossession. Fact and folklore part at several points. Oral memory adds motive and texture. Ledgers fix dates and quantities. Both are needed for a full account. Legal aftermath shaped daily life. Reservation boundaries tightened schools spread, and allotment remade landholding, but did not erase identity. Religious and political leadership overlapped. Support for the Peyote Road offered discipline and hope when policy limited older forms of ceremony. Modern continuance is clear. The Comanche Nation governs programs in Oklahoma and sustains language classes, cultural events, and community services. Material legacy endures at places like the Star House and in family records that tie Red River country to Fort Sill and beyond. The episode's lesson is adaptive sovereignty. Within hard limits, leadership found narrow paths that kept families together and culture alive. Quanah Parker endures in memory because he turned distance into diplomacy and carried the Numunu across a decisive threshold without letting them fall.